Hello, is this thing on?
Do you think they can hear us?
Nah, let's say it again. Hi, and welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion related to health and healthcare. My name is Amy.
And my name is Sarah.
And we are your podcast hosts.
If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, Amazon, or any other podcast listening platform, don't forget to subscribe so you can get updates to when we have our latest episodes. Also, don't forget to rate and review us.
And if you like what you're hearing and you love our advocacy work, don't forget to go to www.grittynurse.com and click on the donate button.
As little as $1 or $2 a month for a total of $12 a year will help us with our monthly podcast costs, such as website hosting, our hosting platform,
audio equipment, and the time and energy it takes us to put out good quality episodes. We thank you and we appreciate you. So, it's been 2 weeks and we're back.
It feels like so long, but so short at the same time.
Right. No, I completely agree with you. And I know we typically don't do the introductions, what we've been doing, but maybe we can just kind of in 1 minute, just why we took a break and kind of what we've been up to. And then we could just jump into what we're going to talk about.
Sure. Well, I think for me, it's pretty easy. I've been moving. So I moved from Toronto to Hamilton, and you and I now live down the street from each other, which for me, it wasn't totally planned, but it kind of happened that way. And you were one of many reasons I moved.
Sarah, you never said that to me before.
Yeah, I mean, I literally, you know me, I sat down and I made a list of all the reasons that I wanted to move here, and you made it onto the list. Obviously, I don't think you're the top reason. Sorry, but you made it onto the list. I'm getting used to being back in the suburbs. It's literally been half a lifetime since I've been back here, so it's been a big adjustment, but in a good way. I think we kind of took a break because we were super busy in May and June with lots of things related to Nursing Week and interviews. And I think we just really needed a break to kind of regroup and figure out what other things we wanted to talk about. And of course, things are getting better, which is awesome. Things are opening up again. And we kind of wanted to just see, what else we still want to cover.
I'm very happy that you moved out here too. It's nice to have another familiar face kind of in the neighborhood, and we can get together and our kids can have a swim or whatever the case may be. So that's super cool. In terms of taking a break, I think we just needed to. We have been going at 110. I think that this podcast is literally a job onto itself. As much as we love the work, it is a lot of work. So it was just nice to have 2 weeks of us not doing the podcast, but I don't think our other work stopped. I'm sure you were still doing your resume stuff. I was still doing advocacy for various different programs. So that stuff didn't slow down, but it was nice to have a little bit of a breather. So
yeah, actually, when you suggested that we take a week off, I was so relieved because I've been wanting to take a break, but I didn't know how you felt about it. So you just took the words out of my mouth.
Okay, good. Because I was nervous about asking you too. I was like, oh, I know, we have momentum, things are happening, but we also need to be mindful and take care of ourselves too, right? If we can't, if we're burnt out, it affects our families, it affects us, of course. It'll affect the quality of work that we do in our, our personal lives, our podcasts, and our working lives. And I think we just, every once in a while, it's nice to hit the reset button and come back with some more fire. And I'm sure we'll have some fire for this episode as well.
Yeah, and actually, the last time we took a break was way back. It was 6 or 7 months ago. It was around the holidays. That was the last time we didn't release for a week. So yeah, much needed.
What are we talking about today?
Okay, so just to preface all of this, I think one of the issues that comes up over and over and over again, and this has been longstanding, is the nursing shortage. So I think that everybody is aware, including the public, that there has always been a nursing shortage. It's getting worse. The population is aging. We know all that. But when we really dig down to the root cause, there are many. But I think one of the things that we don't talk enough about is retention. So we talk about
Right.
recruitment, we talk about training more nurses. We talk about all of these things, but one of the reasons that I think is preventable for nurses leaving the profession is just focusing on how we can retain them in the first place and prevent them from leaving. So we kind of wanted to dive into this topic a little more, share some research, some of our own insights, and really what can we do about the situation.
Like I've seen other people say, and of course this is true, pizza's not gonna cut it. Well, like they're just like, oh, we're gonna smooth everything over with like pizza, and we're gonna make things like, we'll have a little potluck, and the night shift will get whatever's left over in the day, and nurses will be happy. And I really actually hate this notion of, if you feed nurses, they're gonna be happy. Like, no, we actually want to be paid more. And I think there's a lot of things that we could pull out in terms of what might best help retain nurses. And I think this may not even just go for nurses. I think this might go for anybody in healthcare, because the last 2 years have been grueling. And I think that we're already seeing a lot of nurses talking about wanting to leave the profession. So
Mhm.
we need to talk about how we can actually keep them and maintain them in the profession.
Yeah, and actually, you and I attended a webinar talk not too long ago, and they had sent a survey to, thousands of nurses asking them all different stages of their careers, how old they are, how long you've been in nursing, have you ever thought about leaving, how close are you to leaving, that sort of thing. And the scary thing is that a lot of, I would say, early to mid career nurses, so nurses that are around our age or younger, are seriously thinking about leaving the profession. And we're talking about nurses that have recently graduated, even thinking about leaving. So we can't even say it's due to early retirement or whatnot. But these are nurses in the prime of their career. And for whatever reason, I mean, I've got my own ideas, but they can't handle it. And we need to figure out why that is, because you spend a lot of time and energy and money into becoming a nurse, and to leave just a few years in, it's really a waste and it's a loss.
Yeah, well, like look at the comment that we got today, right? We got a comment in through our website of a nurse pretty much saying, I think she's a practical nursing student, and she was just like, it's even before she started that she's kind of like, I don't think I'll be able to keep up with this. I don't think I'm going to be able to continue being a part of this profession because of some of the things that I've seen with COVID and just
Hmm.
online schooling, all of that. And if I think about even just like what Matthew was saying last week, right? And he was just like, online clinical is not a thing. And it's just, I feel for them. Like, if I was them, I'd be scared shitless too. Like, I'd be terrified to be put into a hospital situation at this point in time.
Well, I recently did an interview with somebody, and they're looking at research on exactly what you talked about, which is, so they want to basically find two groups of new grads. So one group is the group that did the virtual, clinicals this past year,
Hmm.
and the other group, which is out in BC, they were able to, for more or less, do in-person clinicals, and they want to follow these two groups and see what their career trajectory looks like over the next couple years.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really great idea because, I mean, what I said to them was, I don't think hospitals, to be honest, are factoring this into when they hire new grads right now. They're not necessarily giving them more orientation shifts. They're not doing anything different. They're not changing the budget based on the fact that these nurses didn't get to train properly. So I think that we're always looking for the short-term solution, and for this, I don't think there is one. You just need to understand that everybody is at a disadvantage, so not just nursing students or new grads, but the hospital as well, because we've got to train these nurses to be able to practice safely.
Well, my fear again with that, we've both been in these positions where, even during no pandemic, that it's like slash and burn, right? It's just like, okay, so how can we meet the hospital's budget? How can we do this most efficiently, or how can we do this most effectively? And I really hate when they abuse the term lean, when they're like, we need to make this lean. And it's like, oh, you're like not using that the way it's actually intended to be used. And I can only imagine what the hospital organization's budgets are like right now. I'm sure that, if we were to look at them, they're probably well over budget, right? And
Mhm.
now I can only
Mhm.
imagine that they're going to be like, well, we need to get back to some sense of normalcy, but we need to cut. And always, 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 nursing is the one that gets cut. Always. You always
Yeah.
see it as like, when they're looking at budgets, when they're looking at leaning out their organization, or they're looking at, which way can we be more efficient? It's always with nursing. And nurses never complain. They just do more with less. And it like we can't keep doing that. I think if we try to keep doing that, I can only imagine how worse it's going to get for nursing as a profession. And I'm quite fearful. I'm waiting for
The other shoe to drop.
yeah, in 6 months. Oh, we've cut these nurses. These nurses we're back to having more part-time positions. This is what I'm fearful that we're going to see instead of those strategies, and maybe we can kind of talk about them a little bit more. We're going to see more efficiencies. How can we do this better? How can we be more cost effective? How can we be more frugal? And it's always, always on the backs of nurses.
Right. And I actually found this study. It was from McGill in 2019 about the global shortage of nurses. And they said actually nurse salaries represent 25% of a hospital's operational budget and 40% of patient care costs. I actually think that number should be higher. If you think about the fact that the nurses in a hospital are typically the largest group as a whole, and we think about, okay, yes, in the grand scheme of things they do take up most of the budget, but they should, if not more, and they just want to keep cutting and cutting and cutting. I'm not going to name this particular organization, but I do know that towards the end of the fiscal year, one year, they were so short that they actually asked everybody to stop taking out Kleenex and pens and these other types of office supplies because they were so short. And the number one cause of them going over budget was sick time. So when we're thinking about like workloads that are not sustainable, it's going to result in sick time.
Of course.
And this is part of the problem with nurse retention is that we're expecting everybody to do more with less, and it keeps going and going and going. And when is this going to, I guess, when is this going to end?
You know, the fact that, and I know this is going to be the situation where it's going to be like, I think this is where like the public doesn't really understand when they talk about, how they're going to meet these budget, hospital budgets or whatever. And when nurses talk about, the fact that, like, for example, that one nurse was saying to us today that they've been asked not to take vacation. How can you ask people not to take vacation, right?
I mean, that has happened already during the pandemic, but at some point that's got to stop because we all need a break. And honestly, if you go over your certain number of hours, you have to use them or you lose them. And I'm worried that this is already happening.
I think we were saying this at the very beginning of the pandemic where we were talking about mental health and mental health resources, right? These are some of the things that I think could have been started and initiated early on to help support nurses, to help retain nurses, because I think that the effects of COVID and the burnout and the stress, because nurses, how nurses are, like we go, 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 go 110%. And then when you have that moment to stop, reflect, and think, that's when it's crushing, right? Like you said, we're kind of turning a page on with what's happening in the pandemic. We're seeing some of the lowest numbers that we've seen in months, seeing, cases less than 200. But again, that all of what has been building over the last 2 years, the stress, the anxiety, the trauma that nurses and physicians and other healthcare practitioners have faced during this pandemic, that's going to come out somewhere. It's not going to just all of a sudden, oh, pandemic is done, everything's fine, and we just go back to our normal lives like the shit was bad before. It's only going to be worse now. And I just don't know. I feel like the first thing that's going to happen and the first thing that's going to go is going to be nursing.
Mhm. Yeah, and when I think about new grads, you have this idea that a new grad is someone in their 20s, fresh out of university or school, but I would say over the last 10 years, the the average age of a new grad has changed. We're talking about nurses in their second, third, or even fourth careers. Like the nurse that messaged us today, I think she was 48. So she's definitely not in her first career. And she's working a job to make ends meet while going to nursing school. And this job that she's in right now, she's a PSW, or if you guys are in the States, a CNA. So she already has her foot in the door in healthcare, and she's feeling the stress already. And I can only imagine how this is going to play out when she transitions into a nursing role. Like, I think a lot of those same issues will still be there.
Well, look what's happened just recently, and even talking about some of the things that she highlighted today. And like I don't want to knock the personal support workers, because there's been talks that that $3 will be permanent. Again, I've been seeing things back and forth that like Doug Ford said it was going to be permanent, and then all of a sudden he's like backtracking. So like but I'm not going to knock them. But there are a lot of nurses that are cheesed off, right? That are still really ticked off, saying, "Hey, all right, you've given them a wage increase, but you've capped us at less than 1%.
Yep.
Still fighting about Bill 124, right? And the fact that, that interference of the ability to collectively bargain. And the other thing is, a lot of nurses don't even realize that there's no wage change between year 8 and year 25, which is crazy. Like,
In Ontario, at least. I can't speak for anywhere else, but my theory is, and my theory has always been, once you've been a nurse for 8 years and you have to be working 8 years full-time hours, are you actually going to leave the profession? And I used to say the answer was no, you'd never leave. But honestly, these days, I might change my answer. But really, you're capped for, what is it, 18, 17 years at the same salary. And then you get a one-time bump at year 25. So, I mean, yes, you do increase the first 8 years, but I don't know any other profession that operates like that, to be honest.
well, like if you think about it, it's just like, in what profession could you say to someone, you know what, for the first 8 years, we're going to continue giving you pay raises, but after that, until you hit year 25, you get nothing. Most people continue to be incentivized the longer that they work for whatever profession that they're in. And how is it nurses hit, maybe that's their stride, and they get capped for that long of a period? And the thing is just like, well, no one says anything. Again, there's this weird, like, we don't want to rock the boat. We're going to keep up with status quo, and we're not going to complain because we got into this profession because we care. Well, I hope that you care enough that your back's getting stepped on at this point, right? I think nursing has had enough. At least I hope that nursing has had enough to be like, okay, well, why are these things continuing to happen in our profession specifically, right? Like I can't speak for physicians, I can't speak for social workers, I can't speak for PSWs. But when you look at nursing as a whole, for whatever reason, there's these weird little things that just happen specifically to our profession. Again, when it comes to financial stability, it begs the question: is it because we're female dominated? Like, what exactly is it that we're put in these positions where we're not arguing, we're not standing up, and we're not saying that this is actually not adequate? Because I feel with this whole retention issue, where if we don't talk about it, I can just see that, it will go back to nurses being just like, oh, I got to the point where I just had to leave.
Right. And I think that as nurses, as part of our culture is that we complain and we vent, right? So we've talked about in a previous episode how that could be not the best coping strategy. But I would say if you're going to complain, use that energy and complain to the right people. So if you're complaining to each other, venting to each other, that is probably not someone that can do anything about the situation. So why don't you complain to your union, to your manager, to higher up, advocate for what you feel is right. And one other thing I wanted to mention is the whole the whole pay raise situation, right? So from year 8 to year 25, you don't get any pay increase. The only thing you get is your seniority, which, as we
Right.
know as nurses, is everything when you're in a hospital, because it gives you better shifts, it gives you more ability to, get the hours that you want. And just kind of segueing into another topic, which I feel is really important to nurse
Yeah.
retention, is the schedule. Like, when you're a nurse with kids, when you've got a young family, schedule is everything. Like, I remember when I found out I was pregnant the first time, I was still in NICU, and literally, I'm not even joking, my first thought was, I gotta find childcare, I gotta get on a wait list somewhere. And that shouldn't be the case. Like, and I remember even my colleagues saying to me, "Oh, you're just gonna, like, you're gonna be part-time for the next 5 years, just like all the other young girls around here." But why should that have to be the case? Why should I have to go part-time or casual or whatnot, just so that I can manage my family and work the hours and shifts that I have to work?
Well, that's a really good point. And I was thinking about this recently. So my aunt lives in Florida, and at the University of Miami Hospital, they actually have on-site childcare for nurses and physicians. And I
Really?
guess it's just a model that they have. And my aunt has actually been a kindergarten teacher or preschool teacher for over 25 years at the University of Miami Hospital. Why don't we have something like that here? Like, why don't we have childcare options at our hospitals? Like,
Mhm.
that sounds like a pretty sweet deal. That, I think she told me that the hours start at something like 5 o'clock in the morning and they go to like really, really late. And why don't we have something like that? Like, why haven't we at least tried it? And I think that would be something that would be beneficial. Why is it that I have to sacrifice, my income, my job prospects, whatever the case may be, to go down to part-time hours because the organization's not going to be that accommodating? And we see this not just in nursing, but in a lot of other jobs as well.
Yeah, I feel like, so I'm just thinking back to my colleagues that had kids, and I feel like you do one of a few things. So number one is you do straight night shifts so that you can,
Right.
your kids are sleeping and you're at work, and then you come home, and if you're lucky enough that they're school age, you drop them off at school and you sleep during the day. But I do know other nurses that burn the candle at both ends, and they looked after their kids in between night shifts. I'm like, when do you even sleep? Like, that's
Yeah.
physically dangerous. So number one, they would do the night shifts back to back. Number two, they would keep their schedule but cobble together childcare on the days that they had to work. But that doesn't work because you never work the same days of the week. So it's not like you could find someone Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So they would do that. Or, like, the other thing is they would be constantly switching shifts so they could get certain days off that they had childcare. Or they just go down to casual, or even, quit altogether until they're ready to come back. I don't think any of these
Yeah.
are good options. And I kind of wonder why. You had mentioned once, why couldn't they explore more flexible shifts or even 8-hour shifts for nurses that have young kids? Because it's much easier to find care for 8 hours than 12.
Well, I always wonder kind of like, where are these models and what are they based on, and why are they based the way that they are, right? Do we have to have 12-hour shifts? Oh yeah, and this is just a random aside. I saw a nurse's paycheck that just recently moved from Canada to the States to work, and she was actually paid for 12 hours. Not
Really?
11.25 hours, 12 hours. I was like, what is happening? But the thing is, where do we get these ideas that, you have to work, or we have to have schedules based on 12 hours? And I really wonder if it's about that whole efficiency machine. It's efficient for the system, it's efficient for the business model, but not necessarily efficient for the person, not efficient for the life balance person, individual, right? I think it's so easy to forget that behind all of this, that there are actually people working, right? There are people that have lives, people that have children and families.
Mhm.
I mean, there's many nurses I've spoken to that they're like, "Yeah, I haven't seen my husband for like a week."
I know
'Cause it's
that,
just
like,
like
I think some
flip flop,
yeah.
and it's just like, yeah, like I haven't even seen my spouse, right? Like, how is that sustainable and how is that beneficial for the family unit? It's not, right?
Yeah, and so back in my mom's day, it was only 8-hour shifts, and I remember even when I started as a nurse, there were several older nurses on the unit that had been grandfathered into their 8-hour shifts, and the hospital was waiting for them to retire. So once they retired, there were only 12-hour shifts, and I can tell you
Right.
that it is based on efficiency. It's much easier to schedule 2 shifts versus 3 shifts in a day, and it's not for anyone's benefit that's actually working. I think it's for the benefit, as you said, of the system, of the machine, if you will, to keep it running on 2 shifts versus 3. And I don't know, like, I don't know. I know there are some nurses that would prefer to work fewer shifts, and that should be available as well. So just going back to the idea of flexibility, I think is really important to, number 1, reduce sick time, and number 2, retain nurses.
Yeah. So let's kind of get into some of maybe our own thoughts in terms of what are some strategies and what are some takeaways in terms of retention. And like you said, I think the first thing is flexibility, right? I think healthcare is very, very rigid. Like,
Mhm.
if there's anything that goes off of these rigid, ridiculous principles that, somebody grandfathered in, or, some random person who probably has never worked in healthcare, but they're efficient at business, has come in and said, this is how you should do this. No compassion, no understanding, no real insight into how this actually works. And I think it happens a lot in healthcare. But again, we have these like rigid, this is the way we've been doing things. This is how you make money. This is how you produce. Yes, we have to be mindful of some of that stuff. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that there's a person at the end of that. And I can tell you, nurses are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think we're at the point where a lot of nurses are like, we're not going to take this abuse. We're going to leave. So I think organizations should start looking at more flexible schedules. Start questioning yourself as to like, why exactly are we doing this? Are we doing this because, it's best practice? Are we doing this because we've always been doing this? Or are we doing it just because, it is about cost efficiency? I think there's got to be some form of a happy medium, and we need to start looking at schedules that may be more flexible for the people that might be working in your organization.
Mhm.
Think about women that are working there. Think about childcare options. We need to move away from these rigid, autocratic, paternalistic types of schedules and move to something that's more democratic, something that's more equitable, something that looks at these different principles that we need to see in healthcare.
Yeah, I think that on some units, in some hospitals, there are actually scheduling committees. So this was something that was part of a unit I used to work on. So if there's any way that you can be involved in scheduling, I would encourage you to get involved. You know, reach out to your union, to your nurses association, make your voice heard, because if you're feeling this way, chances are a lot of other people are as well. And I think that it's just really a matter of voicing your opinion. You know, you gotta lead the change that you want to see. So I
Mhm.
can tell you, I've been a casual nurse, I've been part-time, I've been full-time, I've done the Monday to Friday. It's All of them have their challenges, but I really think that you need to find what works best for you. um I just think that as a nurse, your schedule kind of dictates your life, whether or not you can, you know, attend family functions, whether or not you can go to weddings, birthdays, funerals, like all of that. It's your life is governed around your schedule, and people that work 9 to 5 don't understand the struggles that we face, right?
Right.
So I had a friend, for example, who said to me like, "Can't you just explain that you have a wedding to go to?" I'm like, "Every weekend is somebody's wedding. Every weekend is somebody's anniversary. It doesn't matter. My event doesn't trump anybody else's, you know, right to have that weekend off." So I just think that there's many different ways that we can look at this.
Yeah. I think another really good principle in terms of retention is we kind of touched on it is flexible childcare options, right? I don't think we are nearly as creative as other places are. Like, the States has this model where they have on-site childcare. I can bet you that there'd be a lot of nurses and physicians and other people working there that would jump on the opportunity to actually do that. I mean, what could be better than, dropping your child off at whatever time in the morning, going back during a break or whatever, breastfeeding your child, going and finishing your shift, and then picking up your child afterwards. Like, I mean, I think to me, that sounds like gold, right?
Mhm.
Why haven't we exercised or checked to see if that is something that's feasible here?
I think that we've been talking so much about scheduling that we forgot the even better solution, which, as you just mentioned, is the childcare. Like, and it's not that you would even need it every single day, right? Because the shifts that we work, it might only be 2 or 3 days a week. And to have it as part of the hospital, you definitely have business. I can tell you that nurses would flock towards a hospital that had that. So,
Nurses and
oh yeah,
physicians.
and,
I think
like
it would be like
everybody
a
that works shifts,
huge incentive,
RTs,
right?
anybody that's on shift could benefit from this.
Absolutely. Again, the other piece to retention is financial, is money. I know this is probably an argument to have with whoever your collective bargaining units are, or your union, or if you're non-union. But again, the fact that we are probably one of, I don't think, a handful of professions where we have this huge wage gap where we're just not paid for. There, like, every year there's an increase for cost of living. We need to move with the times. Like, how is it that it's acceptable that you could be working for a profession for over 25 years, and for you to, see a huge change and differential in your pay, you got to wait for like a huge period of time in between. I think that's crazy, right? Like, it's just any profession worth its salt. That, like, if I was to be an executive, could you imagine me for how many years, like over 10 plus years, being like in the same role and never having a pay increase?
Mhm.
That's crazy. Like, nobody would check the box to say, hey, you know what, I'm a really great person. I'm a nice person. I'm going to work here for 8 years. And then, from year 8 to year 25, don't give me a cent more. What the hell is that? Like, nobody wants to do that. Why are we doing that?
I know. Yeah, and the thing is, in other industries, it's performance based. So let's say from year 8 to 25, you do an amazing job. Your patients love you. Your colleagues love you. You take all these extra courses to further yourself, to become a better nurse. There should be some sort of, reward placed on that. I know certainly for my husband's industry, there is. They give out, I think one of his bosses at one point was getting a 30% bonus on top of his salary. 30%. So, like, think about that. Even if we got, like, 10%, that would be awesome.
You know what nurses get after 25 years, Sarah? Have you seen?
They get, okay, I can tell you what they get. A suitcase, you can get a pair of earrings, you could get wine glasses, you could get a little pin. You pick from a catalog. That's what I've seen the nurses doing. An umbrella. Well, okay, you know what though? Here is something else that came out of the study from McGill. So they said one of the other things is teamwork. So the research actually shows that it's important to provide on site workshops on topics such as conflict management. So actually making it a healthy workplace culture that people want to work in. I can't tell you how many nurses I personally know who have switched their lines because they don't want to work with the people on a certain line, they want to be on another line.
Well, we're being online moduled to death, right? Like, it's just like, here's your new e-learning. And it's just like, okay, well, you click, 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 click. And then you're like, oh, you got the 3 questions at the end. You answer one wrong and you're like, oh, you got to go back and do the quiz again. And now you know what the
Yeah.
answer is. And it's just like, we're being online moduled to death. I really hope that after the pandemic, people are like, it's nice to see people again. So let's do some in-person, in-house workshops. And I always, like, I actually said this week. I'm like, why is it that nursing is the only profession? I shouldn't say only profession, because it's different. I have seen answers that it's different in other places in the States and whatnot, where, we're not regulated to have a certain amount of credit hours in, whether it is, continuing education. nursing is like I remember speaking to some nurses that are like 40 years in, 30 years in. I'm like, hey, like, have you done anything outside of the education that we have at the hospital? They're like, why would I do that? I'm like, because times change, things change. You want to kind of keep up with best evidence. They're just like, no. And again, there's no incentive really to get it done either.
There's no incentive, there's a disincentive. So let's just say, for our particular college, you're supposed to show evidence of continuing education, but they only audit a certain number of people a year. So everyone technically is expected to have this ready to show if they get audited. But I don't think that's an incentive. I feel like that's a disincentive. So if you can't show anything, then you might be penalized. But we should be moving towards more of a rewards based system, I think, for continuing education. And I mean, going back to that, I mean pay increase for doing some extra work, to further yourself.
Or subsidize some of that education. Like, I think there's so many nurses that I've spoken to that they're like, oh, I want to do this course, it cost me thousands of
Right.
dollars. Or, I want to do this course, I had to take time off, my employer is not even going to support me to do it, so now I have to lose pay, do this, continuing education, and I get nothing. Like, I literally lose from doing it, right? And I think it's just kind of crazy that organizations aren't being like, go and do this because we want you to do this. It will benefit you as an organization if these nurses have this extra education.
I feel like this is what we do as women, though. We kind of let people step all over us and we take it because we think that, we don't want to rock the boat. Maybe I'm wrong. So we kind of take it. We don't fight back and say, no, I actually am taking this to further myself, to improve my role and the quality of care I deliver. So, you need to cover it.
Yeah, it's just, this is what I'd like to say. It's like wishy-washy, right? It's like, oh, okay, we've got this quality assurance program. We're going to choose a couple random people here and there. For example, Ontario Medical Association is like, you need to have this set amount of hours. You need to do this to license ship up. And there's so much variety in terms of the CMEs that are done, and some of them are super cool. Like, I remember running a CME with Dr. Sharda, and it was like sim based, and you get people wanting to participate because, one, it's like, well, you need to do this to keep your license up, and two, it's continuing education that is applicable to your clinical area. It's just, I don't know. I don't know what else to say, because I think that I feel like if they gave nurses the option and the ability to do these things and gave them the time and the incentive, that we would see such a difference in terms of the mobilization of the profession as well. The reason I feel why it's so stagnant is because there isn't really that requirement, so to speak, in terms of hours to make sure that work is being done. But
Yeah, and I think it really just standardizes things, right? So CME stands for continuing medical education. So if we were to, let's say you and I developed a course, it has to meet certain standards in order to be like to meet the hours. And I think that just sets a standard. So like, oh, I'm taking this course, I get 4 CMEs. Okay, so I know it's a legit thing. It's not just something you decided to take on, like, I don't know where. Like, you found a course run through YouTube or something. Like, this is an actual course.
yeah, there's learning goals, objectives. Mhm.
Yeah, it's evidence-based, it's, run by health professionals, that sort of thing. So, it makes it kinda more concrete and specific instead of, like, you need to find something that's gonna show that you are furthering yourself as a nurse, but that could be anything. And it also doesn't give you any direction on what you can do.
And trust me, I could tell you there are some nurses that need some education out there, because, like, I'm not even lying to tell you. And this is probably for another episode, but I remember this nurse coming up to me, and this is this year, okay? Like, this year, of a nurse saying to me, hey, they're going to be doing that thing about the black people. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean, that thing? She's like, you mentioned you did it somewhere else and it talks about black people. I'm like, like Black History Month. She's like, oh yes, that thing. I'm like, oh my God. Like, what?
Whoa, tone deaf.
Right? And this is just another topic I'm just gonna slide it in there that we need to be talking about racism in healthcare. We need to talk about how to be anti-racist in healthcare, because again, we're seeing it time and time again. Waiting, or this patient has come and they're indigenous, they're like, I'm having
Mhm.
so much pain, and then they die of sepsis. It's like, why are we still treating people this way, right? And I think, I'm not saying that education is the be all and end all, but rudimentary, like we need to start talking to people about Black history, about indigenous history. With the revelation of the residential schools, Canada needs to know its history. Nurses need to know that they were a part of some of that drama. We just need to come clean and come
Mhm.
full
I
circle
agree.
and really start talking to people about really difficult things. But that's just my little rant. So,
Well, I think one last thing I forgot to touch on is I actually found out when I was pregnant the first time that in Quebec, if you are pregnant, you get to work only day shifts. So I don't know if this is still the case, but when I found that out, I could not believe it. Like, there's a province that actually understands how hard it is to be working while you're pregnant, and let's kind of continue that on with working when you have small kids. I honestly feel like anyone that has kids that are 5 and under should be allowed some flexibility in their working. Um, I think you can make it work if you have a really supportive spouse, but not everybody has that. You might be a single mom, and like, how are you going to actually make this work? I think it's just about understanding, like you said, that people are human beings with lives and responsibilities, and we can't expect people to work like machines.
well, there's other countries that have, I shouldn't even just say countries. There are other places in the world that have moved towards 4-day work weeks. I mean, I think we need to start seeing some of the models and some of the things that have happened through the pandemic, and what other countries and other places in the world are doing, and be a little bit creative. And I think the last piece that I kind of wanted to throw in terms of what organizations can do for retention, just ask nurses, like ask them, like, oh my gosh, like,
Right.
I
Ask a
think a lot of
nurse.
times they're like, oh, we're gonna come up with this great idea, we're gonna do this, and the nurses are gonna love it. And it's like, did you actually ask a nurse? Like, ask a nurse whether that would be meaningful to them. Give them the opportunity and the platform to speak. And I don't mean just by doing this, send out an email survey, because nurses hate those things. Have focus groups, have times where nurses can come together, paid time. Don't ask nurses to come in off their shift and be like, oh, this is just because we want you to come and we're not going to give you money. Pay them for their time, and ask them, what is it that we can do to keep you here? Because we need nurses. There is no healthcare without nurses. I could tell you, if nurses stood and held up the wall for 1 hour, you would see the pandemonium
For
that would
sure.
happen. Healthcare needs nurses, and they need to treat nurses with a lot more dignity and respect than we've been seeing over the past 2 years, and then some. Ask a nurse.